Good morning and welcome to our webcast about application maintenance and application management services. I'm Henrik Zangenberg, and joining me, the tallest colleague I have in the office, Mads.
Yes, my name is Mads Jørring, and I'm a senior consultant at Zangenberg, and I will be presenting together with Henrik today.
And we've been looking forward to this presentation. It's a topic we find extremely interesting. We usually refer to application maintenance as the sleeping giant in the IT budget. This is where a lot of money goes to sleep. This is where you will find, if you go through your portfolio of contracts, you'll find a number of application management, application maintenance contracts that you've been paying over the last 5 or 10 or 15 years without really investigating what is the real effort behind, and is the price reasonable. We'll get back to that many times during today's presentation. So let's start out with some definitions. You will hear and read about AMS, Application Management Services. And Application Management Services is really the over category of activities related to the management of applications, including the planning, the monitoring, and the maintenance of the application landscape, which is what we're going to dive into today. So today is really more about AM than on AMS as a whole. Because AM is where a lot of the money is being spent. It's on the resolution of incidents, service requests, and problems. It's receiving, handling, and resolving those kind of inquiries. So that's really what we're going to go into. And just to have the ITIL definition completely present, an incident is a one-off, unplanned event that causes a disruption to the service provided. So the incident is really when something goes wrong to some extent. Problems is the underlying cause of one or more incidents. A problem requires a root cause analysis to ensure that the problem does not occur again. And it could lead to a number of activities such as more preventive maintenance kind of activities. And then we have the service request, which is a request from a user for information, advice, a standard change, or an access to a service. And we'll get back to the distinction between these three because it's quite important to understand the distinction. They drive different volumes of activity and time, and therefore money. And obviously, the service request is a function of how many requests the users will have, while incident and problem is a function of the quality of the system and the maturity of the system. So we'll get back to that. Usually, these will be captured in an ITSM, IT Service Management Systems, and they will be, the data format for that will be ITSM records or ITSM tickets, which is a report per incident, per problem, per service request recorded in the ITSM system. So that is really the focus of what we'll be looking at today. But there's a bit broader focus. And then, Mads, you can perhaps take us through this one.
Yeah, so before we zoom in on the application maintenance part of the AMS scope, we will look at the 3 core towers of the application management service. So we have the operations, this is the monitoring and reporting, this is backup and restore, this is the management of capacity and performance of the application, and then we have administration and patch management of the application. Then, like Henrik said, we have maintenance, this is the corrective maintenance of resolution of incidents, problems, service requests, and the preventive maintenance activities connected to the application. Then we have development, which is related to the new development of new functionality in the application. It's important to note that only the operation and maintenance parts of AMS can be benchmarked. We provide both services, But there's a bit of a difference in how these benchmarks are approached.
True. The discussion every company have when they discuss maintenance is, of course, whether an AMS, by the way, is whether smaller changes and enhancements are part of that or not part of that. And when we look at it from a contract point of view, this is, of course, extremely important whether you've included smaller changes and enhancements into an AMS contract or whether that's outside of the contract. For us to benchmark it, obviously, benchmarking the smaller changes and enhancements is like benchmarking development. It's basically something that we and most benchmarkers don't do. We look at this as basically the customer requesting a job being done and the vendor typically quoting a number of hours for performing that job. Whether that number of hours is reasonable is a separate discipline of estimation and checking development estimation. It's completely outside the scope of what we're going to talk about today, because that is case by case, whereas looking at the corrective maintenance, the adaptive and the preventive maintenance is something you can actually benchmark. There will be the possibility to do peer group comparison. I just mentioned preventive maintenance here. Preventive maintenance is typically something that is up to the vendor to suggest, and the vendor should only suggest preventive maintenance in cases where there is a business case, basically saying if we do this, we will have fewer tickets on corrective and adaptive maintenance later on. So typically preventive maintenance is something that is carried by its own business case. You could turn it around and say, why do preventive maintenance if it doesn't really lead to lower maintenance load in total? So that is why we typically look at that as a separate area with a focus on the corrective and adaptive maintenance. Okay.
So there's an important distinction between how you benchmark the application operation and the application maintenance. The application operation is benchmarked as an ITO service. It is one of the ITO towers, such as server, storage, workstations, like you see here, whereas the application maintenance tower is based on a more different approach.
Yeah. Those of you who've been to our presentation on standard ITO, IT operation benchmarking, will know that application operation is just, as Mads says, just another tower, and it is benchmarked using a simple unit price model, and that's also the way you should approach it. It is a P times Q kind of thing, where the more applications, the higher the price. And each application will have a price for the operational services. We'll get back to that in a short while. Just to say, to understand maintenance, you need to understand that development costs the maintenance costs are expected to drop as applications mature. There's an error here in the headline, but the maintenance costs are expected to drop as the application mature. What you see here is a company that bought an application. So the application development bar on the left is the initial investment, and then you see that the maintenance cost after that development project, they will slowly decline over a number of years until it reaches a kind of a plateau that we call the operational maturity plateau, where you will find that there will be smaller changes, if any changes, to the maintenance costs. This is under the assumption that you do not change the application. So you develop the application and then you operate the application. Obviously, in the real world, you will see that you will do smaller additions to the application and changes, which will then give some slight variations over that overall theme that you're looking at here. And the important thing to understand is that the size of the gray bars will depend on a number of price or cost drivers. Obviously, the bigger the development, the higher the size of the development bar, the higher the size of the maintenance. There's actually some kind of expected ratio here that we'll come back to. But the complexity of the system, the size of the system, these two you could have a big system with a low complexity. You can have a complex system with a small size. But the complexity and the size will have an impact on the maintenance. And by the end of this presentation, we'll give you some tools to basically describe the complexity and calculate multipliers that you can use in order to understand the impact on the maintenance size and the maintenance volume. The operational maturity, the older the application, to a certain point at least, the lower the maintenance. The resource mix, obviously, the more senior people you will have, the lower the maintenance effort will be. And then do you have dedicated resources, then you will have a shorter resolution time for the average incident. Whereas if you have a great pool of people that you draw from with less knowledge of the application, you will have a longer time to resolve the average ticket.
Yes. So before you enter a negotiation with a vendor on your application maintenance, you can gain an estimate of the projected maintenance cost, and these are that the maintenance cost will be 15% of development cost, converging towards 7.5% of development cost as the application matures. This can be used as sort of a rule of thumb on the scale of the maintenance cost. However, in reality, each application is different, and as Henrik just listed, there are many factors which goes into the true cost that the vendor has in delivering the application maintenance. And if you want your prices to follow that activity, then a more thorough benchmark is preferable.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, what we're saying is, take a good look at your maintenance contracts, and if they're more than 5 years old and your maintenance cost is larger than 7.5% of the initial investment, then it might be worth looking into. We do not guarantee that you will find savings, but those are the good candidates, and you should expect that for some applications it can be even lower than 7.5%, depending on the cost drivers we discussed earlier. So if you're looking at an application with a low complexity, a small size, a dedicated team and so on, then it's probably less than 7.5%. This is a rule of thumb. This is the cowboy approach, as we stated on the last slide. And the cowboy approach is our new wording for basically the tips and tricks that we'd like to share with you that should help you identify the targets for further analysis and negotiation of your maintenance contracts. So try and apply this to your long tail of smaller contracts, and look into whether you can do something about those that are the sleeping savings in your IT budget, because you will most probably have systems developed a long time ago where you're still paying a lot of money in maintenance. And if you're paying more than 7.5%, rule of thumb, all kind of we do take all. You need to make sure it's a rule of thumb. So But looking into that, you should be able to identify the good candidates for further cost out if that's what you are looking for. So, knowing that, we now move to the real way of doing things. So how do you actually break down your maintenance costs? How do you analyze your maintenance costs? So once you've identified the good candidates for further analysis and activities, what should you do in order to break down the maintenance costs? And the important thing to understand is that usually we talk about IT cost as a simple Q times P equation. Basically, in most cases, you'll find that when we look at IT, it's a matter of the quantity and the unit price. This is the case for, as we demonstrate here, for the ITO area, as we discussed earlier. Saying, okay, so if you want to know the price of server and storage operation, count all the different server types and the storage types that you have here, count them up and multiply that with the unit price that you will have for each of those categories. If you are a quarterly analytics subscriber, you can go in and actually see the prices this quarter for these kind of queues. So Q times P gives you in ITO gives you the price, but it's a little bit more complicated when we go to application maintenance.
Yes, because in order to analyze the underlying activity in application maintenance, you need to consider the time spent on resolution of incidents and problems and service requests, which adds an extra dimension to the equation which Henrik just showed.
But Mads, couldn't we just look at T times P as the new P?
Well, yes, we could. However, there are a lot of things that goes into the T here, which we'll get back to in a minute. A lot of factors which you have a chance to impact the vendor on, which can provide savings on your contract depending on the demands that you set for the vendor.
And on the P, you can also actually choose between different Ps.
Yeah.
Because you can basically determine whether you want this to be done by Danish, Polish, or Indian resources. So the P is also a variable here as the T is, which yes. is why we can't really boil this down to a single parameter. So it's important to understand that you have three parameters in play here, whereas you actually have two in the main picture when it's ITO. Yep. And moving into that, yeah, well, basically we've weaponized this into a real formula here, saying that there are a number of T's and Q's in play here that you have to sum up the Q times T times P. That is because you have different kind of incidents and different kinds of service requests with different T's.
Yes, because it's all about understanding the ticket baseline. So is an incident, are all incidents the same? Should you expect the same resolution time for each type of incidents? This is important to analyze in order to find the right projection for your maintenance costs.
So while this looked fancy, it's actually, well, not simple, but should be quite easy to understand. It's basically a matter of looking at different incidents with different expected use of time.
Yes.
Obviously, what you can do is you can aggregate this up to saying, okay, the average incident, the average service request, the average problem. So you'll only have three different entities here, but usually you'd like to distinguish between the different incidents and the different service requests. I mean, obviously a service request asking for information about how to change a simple parameter in the system, as opposed to perhaps a more elaborate change into access rights or what have you for the whole department. Those are examples of service requests that would require different T's, different time to resolve. So basically, understanding the queue, the number of tickets, you need to understand that that is determined by a few important factors. So the first thing is, we talked about this earlier, but let's go a little deeper on this, on the operational maturity. As an application matures, less tickets should be expected, as we state here. But of course, when you do additional development, these will result in an added number of tickets, but these will also be reduced over time. So basically, you start out with a development activity of 100 million kroner. That will give you 15 million worth of maintenance, all things being equal. Rule of thumb, and sorry, I think was that just a, yeah, I don't think it was a question. If it was a question, please, repeat it. Okay. But so if you then, after that, you have a 1 million kroner enhancement to the system, yeah, that will spur off 150,000 kroner worth of maintenance. But that too will decline over time. So that is important to understand. The second thing is, high technical complexity combined with low code quality will lead to a higher number of tickets and a slower decline. So not only will this impact the number of tickets, the low code quality, the low code quality will also lead to a slower decline. So where we talked about the 5 years decline from 15 to 7.5% in the rule of thumb, well, you should expect this potentially to take much longer. Yep. So that's one thing that impacts the number of tickets. The second thing that impacts the number of tickets is first line service included? So do you have, is first line help desk included? And how far does your first line go? When do they dispatch to second and third line? When do they dispatch tickets from the service desk into the maintenance area? So a good example here is, of course, service requests that could be handled in the help desk but are dispatched to the maintenance service, password reset or user administration. Good example. So are they included or not? But it's also about how many incidents can actually be handled in the help desk. Incidents like known bugs, known workarounds to existing problems, and so on. So how much of that is handled in the help desk, and how much is passed on to the maintenance service. And this leads to the third bullet that's extremely important. What's the level of knowledge management? Because the more knowledge management you have, both directly towards the users, letting them know that this problem exists, so don't call us with this problem, we are trying to fix it right now. So it will not be a ticket in the maintenance system. But also knowledge management from third level and development and maintenance staff to the help desk agents, making sure that they can service end users so that you do not get tickets several times in the maintenance area. This, of course, has a huge impact on the number of tickets and therefore also for the price that you will end up paying for your maintenance service. So this was the queue. Beware of the queue. There's a number of factors that impacts the queue.
Now we move on to the T, which is the time to solve each ticket. There are 5 listed factors. There are obviously the more complex application will mean that it takes a longer time to solve the incidents and problems. Henrik will take you through a framework to dive deeper into the complexity of an application in a minute. Then we have the size of the application. This can be measured in a few ways. This could be the number of function points or use case points, or simply the number of lines of code which is used to program the application. Then once again we have the operational maturity. As the application matures, we will expect less tickets on an application. Then the last two parts have to do with in large part with the vendor. The more competent developers will mean that resolution times are smaller, and obviously if vendors have large churn rates, fewer resources at the vendors will have knowledge of the applications, which can drive the time to resolve incidents up.
Right. So the time will depend, yeah, as you say, on a number of factors, and a few words on the complexity. We borrowed this model and we find it quite useful if you want to get a picture of the complexity. Because if you outsource this to a vendor, discussing whether a thing is complex or not can often be a matter of feelings. And if the vendor says this is an extremely complex system, this is why it is very time consuming to basically, it's very time consuming to maintain the system. The model here is from the methodology used for use case points counting. But we find that this methodology of actually calculating what we call a technical complexity score, TCS, is useful. It's made out of 13 elements, where for each element you'll set a score, basically from 0 to 5. And I'll just go through them very briefly, because I think it's good to understand that these are the things that actually impact the complexity. So is it a distributed system? And you can see in this example, no, it's not a distributed system. It's a central system, so the score is 0. How are the response time and performance objectives on a scale from 0 to 5? Here they are 4, pretty high. What are the requirements for end user efficiency? Basically average 3. What's the internal processing complexity? So looking at the code, what's the processing complexity? It's very high on this particular. It's considered very high on this particular system. What's the requirement for code reusability? They are high. How easy should the system be to install? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be installed anywhere else as where it is, so it's 0. How easy should it be to use? It's only being used by a few people. So average. Is it important that we can that this system is portable to other platforms? No, it's not. How big are the requirements for system maintenance? Average, so it's a 3. Does this system have concurrent or parallel processing properties? Yes, it does. Quite a few actually, so we give it 4 out of 5. What about the security features? Well, not really important here. It's a closed system working behind firewalls and so on. So the system itself does need to be very secure. What are the requirements for access to third parties? Well, average. And what are the requirements for end user training? Average. So these are the scores. And in the model you have a weight system. So the different factors will have different weights. You get a weighted score, you sum it up, you add it to 0.6 and you have the factor. And the idea is that if the factor is above 1, it's an above average complex application. If it's below 1, it's a below average complex application. So basically what we're looking at here is something that is pretty close, but it's slightly below average complexity of this application. Now this is something you can take to the vendor and say, well, according to standard methodologies, we would regard this as a slightly below average complexity application, which means that for the complexity factor of the total equation, we shouldn't expect that to contribute to a higher price. As with all negotiation, the more data you have to substantiate your claims, the better positioned you are in the negotiation. And this is, in our opinion, a pretty potent piece of data to use in a negotiation. So use this. You can find more on this on the internet if you look up technical complexity factor. Yep, it's something we've used actually in a recent project to basically substantiate that. Yep, there's no extra. You can't justify putting extra cost on the contract based on complexity.
Yes. So moving on to the third cost driver for application maintenance, which is obviously the P. In this case, we will be looking at the vendor's hourly rate, which is obviously what is used to put together with obviously the number of tickets and the time to resolve each ticket. The first two have to do with the resources used at the vendor. We can both look at the seniority split, how many senior or junior resources are used to resolve these incidents and problems. We can look at the geographical sourcing split between local, nearshore, and offshore resources. I'll get back to these two in a minute. Then we can look at the pricing model. This is obviously relevant because it determines the degree to which the hourly rate is important for the overall cost of the application maintenance, and we will come back to the different pricing models in a minute as well. And then obviously the more risk is taken on by the vendor, the larger hourly rate they will charge. And finally, the terms and conditions are obviously important because if the degree of penalty is large in the contract, they will charge a larger hourly rate, or if the commitment period is small, they will also charge a larger hourly rate. So there's a number of contract terms which may impact the hourly rate.
Yeah, and risk and terms and conditions are of course some kind of Siamese twins here, that terms and conditions that imply some kind of risk, as is the case with ITO contracts and development contracts, those kind of terms will always be capitalized by the vendor, saying that if the vendor is expected to take on some risk, you should expect to pay for that. But there could be risk outside of the terms and conditions. There could be risk inherent in the setup. So that could be obviously if the bad code quality translates into a risk of not being able to use specific kind of resources, that kind of thing, that will be translated into a higher price as well. So you will be seeing some of these things that can impact the hourly rate.
Yeah, so if we consider the resources used by the vendor, obviously a vendor who's looking to earn the most money possible will be optimizing the seniority split in the ticket resolution as the applications mature. And as the application mature, we will expect that the vendor will use more and more resources with few years of experience, which is of course something that will impact the cost that the vendor has. And this is something you should consider when considering that you have an application which matures and you want your cost to follow follow that. At the same time, we will also expect that, if we can move on, I think, we will also expect that over time the vendor will use more and more nearshore or offshore resources. Once again, because the vendor is looking to earn as much money as possible, and using nearshore resources is obviously it's cheaper for the vendor and it will give them a larger profit. For example, if you have a fixed price agreement, then the vendors shifting to using nearshore or even offshore resources will provide them with larger profits. As you can see, the price of local resources can be as much as twice as high as nearshore and 3 times as high as offshore resources. So this is something to consider when negotiating the agreement, that if the vendor is using nearshore or offshore resources, then that should impact the price.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that we find a lot of clients that say they only want to use local resources for different reasons, which is something that obviously will drive up the price as compared to a mixed or blended setup where you allow the vendor to utilize nearshore, offshore resources. So it will drive up price. But over time, it will always also become a problem for you if you insist on only using local resources for larger application, as the vendor will simply run out of local resources. We have a huge problem right now here in Denmark with access to talent, access to resources in our local market, which is why a huge part of the maintenance activities undertaken by vendors rely on nearshore and offshore resources for at least part of the work. So consider very carefully whether you really want to insist on the vendor only using local resources, not only for a price reason, but simply because it will lead into to challenges for the vendors medium or long term. So that's one thing, and what we see in most contracts is that you leave it to the vendor to do to make the mix. In some cases, you will instruct the vendor to only use resources within the EU for GDPR or other reasons, in which case you only have local and nearshore resources and not offshore resources. In other cases, you'll make this up to the vendor, just making sure that they adhere to the compliance requirements you have in terms of data protection and other things that could be of importance here. Just a few brief comment on this one as well, on the seniority level. On this graph, you can actually see the expected split of seniority level on the average contract over time. And as you can see, the split is between 3 years or 6 years of experience. So below 3 years is the junior, above 6 years of experience are the senior resources. And you should expect the senior resources to play a declining part of managing the task, and the junior resources to go up to as much as 70% of the task, which of course means that you have a different blended rate for each of the bars here, because there's a price for the gray, the black, and the blue, and the blended rate, as we call it, should change over time. Well, look at the rate cards you have with your Danish vendors right now. They will probably be a good starting point for trying to try and make these kind of calculations. And if you want to basically do the estimation of the nearshore alternative, well, the good rule of thumb here is that it's approximately half the price of the local resources. So by that you can also calculate a blended rate over time for your nearshore alternative. I hope this makes sense in terms of the P that varies over time, and that will be a function of your nearshore local nearshore offshore split in the application maintenance. Okay, so let's then look into the analysis of the job being undertaken by the vendor, because all the rules of thumb that we've used so far didn't really look into what goes on with your specific system and your specific vendor, if it's outsourced, or within your specific organization, if it's insourced. But let's take a look at how you can actually quantify the task being undertaken by looking into the tickets. So we assume that you have an ITSM system, or that the vendor has an ITSM system, and that you share the tickets, you have full access to the tickets in the ticket system. Now, if that's not the case, if you don't have the tickets, or only a few of the tickets, or don't systematically make tickets, go home and do that. Because for this kind of activity, it's extremely important to have the data of what actually went on as you did the maintenance task. Yeah.
Yes, so there are a few ways to, here we will consider an example where we have data for an entire year, and the tickets are, only a small portion of the tickets are categorized into the incident, problem, and service request categories.
So what they do have is they've actually recorded something in the system, but with a lot of the tickets, we don't really know we don't really know what kind of ticket it is.
Yes, so we know the total amount of tickets, and then we have a sample, 31% of the tickets, which are during the year, which are categorized. And obviously in this case, the total amount of tickets is assumed to be correct, but in theory, there could be a lot of shadow tickets outside of the ITSM system, which is also important to know the scale of tickets which maybe aren't registered in the system. But
so the first thing we do is actually we ask, are these all the tickets that should be in the system? And we are told, yes, it's pretty much so. So there might be 5% or something like that are shadow tickets, but we can live with that. That's the kind of uncertainty we can adjust with in the end, right?
Yes. Yeah, so the first method would be extrapolating based on the... no, we had that.
Sorry.
Oh, so yeah, the first method would be taking the 31% of tickets which are categorized and extrapolating onto the total for the entire year. This does not differentiate between a ticket in January and a ticket in September, a ticket in June, even though the data quality is much better in June, as a larger portion of tickets in June are categorized.
Yeah, the blue bar are the unknowns, and as we can see, they must have done something in May here. So from November to April, most of the tickets are unknown, but then they started categorizing from May and onwards. So in total, we have 31% of the tickets, as you said, that are now categorized over the year. It's a lot. It's a larger proportion from May to October, but we have some, at least 31% that are categorized.
Yeah, so this is what we will call, it is based extrapolation based on a non-verified sample, because you take the data at face value and then you extrapolate up to the total amount of tickets.
Yeah, we assume that the blue will have the same distribution as the 31%. That would be our way to analyze the ticket data here.
But you can say there's also another way of doing this, where we look at the data from May, June, and July, because we can see that these have a much larger proportion of tickets which are categorized, and it is therefore can act as sort of a verified sample of data, which can be used to extrapolate onto the entire year. So in this case, we will say that the total amount of tickets is actually follows the same distribution as the tickets in May, June, and July, instead of the distribution of tickets throughout the entire year.
Yeah, so in this case, that would probably be a better way to do it.
A third way to do it would be to do a semantic analysis of the ticket descriptions. So you would look at each ticket, which will typically have a description which includes keywords, and then divide them into incident, problem, or service request based on that. And we have listed some keywords which are both in English and Danish in the box on the right. So you see if something is incident, then we'll put it as an incident, or issue, then that might be an incident or a problem.
And if the word broken or cannot or file or issue or unable to or something like that is in the text, it's probably an incident. And the example here to the right is not the complete list, but you can basically quickly, by looking at the incidents, find a good list of words that would indicate that this ticket is most probably an incident, and this ticket is most probably a service request. For example, the presence of a question mark is often a good indicator that someone is asking about something, which is probably more likely to be a service request than an incident. So building a simple semantic analysis engine is something most of you would be able to do. It's basically searching for these kind of words, and if you find one of the words on the list, you categorize according to a simple root set that you set up. This is actually a usable approach in many cases for to get a good picture of the distribution, but it's obviously not as good as having the thing categorized correctly from the beginning, and it is not as good as the next thing we're going to describe, which is a more machine learning based approach.
Yeah, so before going to that, we can see that using the first, the second, and the third method, you can compare the results of each and see, okay, are these in the same vicinity of each other when it comes to the distribution of the total amount of tickets?
Yeah, and what we see here is basically that in this example, you can see that method 1 and 2 will give you a 61% proportion of the total tickets as requests, while the method 3, where we actually looked at the text, will suggest that there are actually more incidents than method 1 and 2 would indicate. And as incidents are more expensive than incidents and problems are more expensive than requests, then method 3 would suggest that it should actually be a little more expensive than you would think from method 1 and 2. These are all three approximations to the problem. It doesn't give you the full answer, it gives you indications. And it's a good basis for a discussion with your vendor if you can't make a better sample than this, if you can't go into details. And if you have 100 tickets, it might be possible for you to basically hand categorize them, sit down and do that. But if you have 10,000 tickets, it's obviously a bigger job. And these approaches might sure turn out to be the better choice.
Now, of course, once again, it's important to say that the tickets should be categorized, and it's actually a demand you can make that the tickets are categorized.
Yeah, because obviously the best way would be if you could use the tickets as is, which is the preferred and number one here, but that requires that you've actually had your data qualities in order. Then we've been through 2, 3, and 4 right now. Extrapolation based on a non-verified sample, extrapolation based on a verified sample. You could also take 100 out and basically hand categorize them and use that for your extrapolation. Then there was the semantic analysis. And then the last thing is the machine learning approach. We've developed using Google's bidirectional encoder representation from transformers, the BERT algorithm. We've used that to build a machine learning setup that will actually allows us to process incident or ITSM tickets and divide them into different categories of incidents, service requests, and problems. And we basically teach this system with thousands and thousands of verified tickets from client systems. And what we've done is basically, you can see it to the right, this also just to say that the text in your tickets will typically be a very, very good input to this kind of processing. Because as you can see, we've actually taken 3 clients here, public sector and 2 private sector clients. We've taught the system with verified data sets from each. And then we ran the resulting combined algorithm on all 3 of them. And you can see the precision is above 90%, and it's in some of the instances it's very, very close to 100% precision, which demonstrates that this is a good approach. So those of you who want to get more into this, those of you who want to have your tickets analyzed by us, I mean, please contact us. This is something that we can do very quickly, and that will allow us to basically give you a good picture of the distribution of tickets among different categories. So this is the best choice if you do not have a good categorization from the outset. Obviously, you should be working, all of you should be working from today on making sure that all ITSM tickets related to maintenance are categorized in the most precise way to ensure that you can do calculations, benchmarking, and have discussion with your vendor afterwards.
Yes. So once you have mapped your entire ticket baseline, what you want to do to achieve your negotiation target is obviously find out what is the T that we can put into this analysis. What we will do here is in a benchmarking sense is that we will look at the resolution times of service requests, incidents, and problems for different peers of the customer, and then these will be the reference group. Henrik will take you to the reference group later, but what you can see here is that this is a sample of a large database of resolving times for different types of applications. Underlying this, there's information about the complexity of the application and the sourcing, the geographical sourcing of the vendor, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, take a look at this. These are rounded but real figures. So and we've given it the stamp. This is something you can only get here because these are actual numbers from our actual database, and it shows you the variance. So if you look at service requests, there's quite a big variance from 1.5 hours to 5 hours in average for service requests in the different peers. Incidents varies. The less variance actually here in the database, from 3 to 5 hours, and problems from 8.3 to basically 16 hours in average. So a huge variance, but it gives you an idea of where you should expect these numbers to be. I mean, you should have a pretty extreme example if you were to be lower than the lowest and higher than the highest here. So this also gives you a bit of a range. And please notice that the number of tickets itself can have an impact on how effective the vendor or the company itself is on resolving incidents. So these are all these are taken. This peer group is selected with peers that has below 10,000 tickets per year. So if you have much more, then the picture will probably be different. And once you have the number of tickets, and the average time for each ticket type determined, then you can actually look at the expected total time consumption. And in this case, the total time consumption for this application is 4,000 hours per year, or I guess a little more than something close to 3 man years per year. So this basically allows you to do this kind of calculation. Now we only the only thing missing here is putting the P on that equation. So what is the average hourly rate? What's the blended rate we should apply on this number of hours? And then you'll have basically have the maintenance price for this application. Okay, so Mads,
yes.
How do we then enter into a contract on this?
Yes, so obviously we have listed 4 different pricing models which we see in the market for application maintenance, and each of them have relevant pros and each of them have some relevant cons. Obviously, the goal is for you will be to minimize your cost. But the goal of the pricing model is both you want budget security, but you also want to incentivize the vendor to optimize and reduce the number of total tickets. But if we consider the first model, that will be the fixed maintenance fee. That provides you with the maximum budget security, and it provides the incentive for the vendor to optimize and streamline the maintenance activities. Obviously, because if they receive a fixed price and they can reduce the number of tickets and the number of hours spent on maintenance, then they will receive the profits. Obviously, this, as the application matures over time, this can lead to a substantial overpayment compared to the underlying activity which the vendor actually performs. So if you have a 5-year-old fixed price maintenance contract, there's a good chance that with a fixed price, there's a good chance that that you're paying for more hours than the vendor is actually spending.
Yeah, you can say the fixed price is a very used, widely used model. It's a good model. I would say that in the years following the development of the system, because it basically gives you the predictability. It shifts the risk to the vendor. If the vendor built a flawed system, then they will have to basically pay the price for that here. And if you are within the expected range, somewhere around 15% of the development cost plus minus corrected for all the factors we talked about, so on and so forth. But if you are in a reasonable range in the first 2 years, for example, after you develop the system, this could be a very reasonable way of pricing. But if you maintain this price, and we've seen that, the reason why we stress this is we've seen fixed price AMS contracts 10 years old, 15 years old, where obviously the underlying activity level has declined substantially, and therefore people are overpaying a lot. So this is good in the beginning. You need to be very careful in making sure that you benchmark and measure the actual activities you would expect the vendor to have. So you make sure that you adjust this price as you go along. But obviously you can have a fixed price contract with a 15 or 20-year-old system, as long as you are confident that the fixed price actually represent the underlying activity level. Then obviously that gives you the budget predictability that you probably would like.
Yeah, so if we look at the second model, that is a fixed price with an agreed yearly reduction. This could be 10 to 15% per year. This obviously also provides the budget security and has the same pros as the fixed price model. if looking at the cons, it obviously does not account for any streamlining and optimization at the vendor beyond this agreed reduction. But
yeah, and you shouldn't expect the vendor to agree to a reduction as big as the actual reduction, obviously. So the vendor will put in some buffer into the yearly reduction. So the yearly reduction will not, in the price, will not reflect the vendor's expected reduction in activity.
No. The third model would be time and material, and the main con of this model is obviously that the billing is very close to the true cost of the vendor. However, that's a
pro.
Yeah, that's a pro. Sorry. Looking at the cons, the main con is that the vendor doesn't really have incentives to optimize or streamline the maintenance of.
No, you can say on the contrary, actually.
Yeah.
Because the less they optimize, the more money they will make.
Yes, exactly. So if they don't optimize at all, then you will be looking at time and material for the whole contract period. That could be very expensive if the maintenance activity does not drop during.
Yeah, it basically also means that if you're going for the time and material, it does have its benefits, of course. Then besides that, you need to make sure that you measure the activity level and set targets for the activity levels to go down. You measure the average time spent on incidents, and you benchmark that, or in other ways look at that and make sure that that doesn't go haywire in any way. So you need a lot tighter vendor management here and contract management in order to ensure that you don't overpay. It's the same as with development projects. You have a good hourly rate, but how do you make sure that they are not spending too many hours? It's a difficult task. Here it's a little bit easier, but it requires you to basically look carefully every year into number of incidents, average time to resolve the incident. Does that track in the right or in the wrong direction? So the hours reported are considered reasonable.
So the final model would be incident-based pricing, which is paying a fixed price per incident or per problem or per service request. And obviously this provides the vendor with an incentive to resolve these tickets as fast as possible, which is a good thing for you as a client. It's also very simple to manage, especially if you have your internal service desk. And it's very simple to benchmark. Using our hourly rates and time to resolve. Obviously, once again, this does not provide the vendor with an incentive to maintain a system which minimizes tickets. On the contrary, actually, because obviously the more tickets arrive in the system, the more payment the vendor will receive. And like with the time and material model, it does not provide you with budget security.
But in this model, if at the same time as an incident-based pricing, you also have the right for the vendor to suggest preventive maintenance, basically saying, okay, I suggest that we spend 300 hours on this preventive maintenance activity, that we will expect the number of incidents on this kind of incidents to then basically decline over the coming years. So there's a positive business case in that. That will incentivize the vendor to actually suggest things. You pay for those activities and you get the result in a reduced number of incidents over time that you will have to track, of course, that actually happens. But that's the kind of more professional relationship you can get into with your vendor, where you discuss the nature of the maintenance task and the things you could do. We do have discussions right now where vendors and clients are discussing that the vendor says, I'm not getting paid for doing preventive maintenance in different kind of contracts. And you would say that if it's a fixed price contract, well, they do get paid, because if they do preventive maintenance, they will actually gain the benefits of fewer tickets or lower resolution time probably. per ticket. So in some of the models, they will get paid even if they do it without getting money for the individual preventive maintenance activity. While in this setup on the far right, you would obviously have to have a dialogue about those activities and the expected payment for those activities specifically. So preventive maintenance activities is a special area of interest that you would have to handle in different ways in different pricing models as well. Okay, a little bit about benchmarking.
Yes, so obviously we've talked you through the data you need and the price drivers, so to say, but the benchmarking analysis will use this data. So the data input in a benchmarking analysis is the activity. This is the ticket baseline, which is distributed into the necessary categories: incidents, problems, service request. Then there's the complexity of the system, there's the current cost, both if you have a fixed price, but also if there's any time and material included in this. And then there's the contract terms. All this data input will be compared with a peer group, which is based on the mapping of the system. These prices will be normalized, so they will be normalized based on the complexity and the size, and also the cost drivers, seniority and geographical splits. And then we'll provide you with a benchmarking result, which should serve as a negotiation target.
And as you can see here, the peer group will be extracted from our database. And what we will do is we'll basically look into the metrics that are important when you want to compare. So you don't want to compare to something that is completely different. So it needs to be basically the same type of system. It needs to be within some kind of area, the same number of modules. It shouldn't at least be less, it shouldn't be less a smaller system. It shouldn't be, there shouldn't be a substantially different number of support cases or tickets. And as you can see here, we've in this particular example, we've selected a number of peers that all seems to be within the range of what we're looking at. And from those, you can then get prices from these peers. You'll get prices. What are first of all, you'll get T's and you'll get P's, but most importantly, you'll get the T's. So you'll get the average time spent in these peers for the different kind of incidents, problems, and service requests that you then use for your benchmarking. Okay, so the very last thing we will touch upon here in the last quarter of an hour is basically how you go into negotiating these contracts. We've helped a lot of clients benchmarking these kind of contracts, and we've also helped clients negotiate these kind of contracts. Now, a few weeks ago, we had a webcast on software negotiation. Please be aware that this is a completely different kind of negotiation. Software, you're negotiating with people that have a zero marginal cost for the extra product provided. So basically, everything can be priced completely arbitrarily in software. So that is a pretty special kind of negotiation. This is not the case here. In application maintenance, there is an underlying cost by the vendor. So there is a pain limit. There is a price under which the vendor will actually lose money. So it's important to understand that in these kind of negotiations, you need to find that and make sure that you don't go below, and that the pain limit should include a reasonable profit, because otherwise you will be under prioritized within the client, within the vendor, and eventually you will receive a quality lower than you would require and expect. So there is a limit, which is why the benchmarking or the testing of the price against peers is extremely important to make sure that you don't go below market price, you don't go below whatever pain limit there is. Now the question is, when can you renegotiate your, well, basically any sourcing agreement? And what we say is basically any time. So if you're looking at a number of application management contracts, even if you are midterm, the vendors are usually willing to discuss changes to the contracts, especially if you can offer extension to the contract beyond the current deadline. Then all vendors, I think it's safe to say, are willing to discuss changes and therefore also adjusting prices. So larger contracts, larger AMS contracts that's run for a long time are good candidates for negotiation, no matter what the end date of the contract is.
Yes. So we have listed here the 4 steps we believe you should take before preparing the negotiation. And the first one is to collect and analyze the ITSM tickets. This is the process that we have taken you through previously. Then you benchmark, you find the target zone for the negotiation. What price do you want as a result of the negotiation? Obviously, then you choose a pricing model based on the pros and cons, which we discussed. And then you define and calculate alternative sourcing scenarios. It's always important to have an understanding of what is your alternative to the current sourcing scenario, or if you are looking at a development of a new application, what are the alternatives to negotiating an agreement with the vendor who is sat across from you at this negotiation?
Exactly. We have other webcasts on our YouTube channel focusing on the negotiation strategy. So this will be a very brief walkthrough of our negotiation one-pager or negotiation strategy one-pager. For any negotiation, you should be able to fill out this form and tell yourself and your colleagues and ultimately the vendor you are negotiating with, what is the scope of the negotiation? Are we negotiating the AMS agreement as is? Do we want to include more things into the negotiation? Or do we want a more narrow scope for the next agreement? I mean, what is the scope? Do you want to include the help desk? Do you want to include development areas as we talked about before? Do you want to include smaller enhancements or larger enhancements or a pool of hours for development activities as you move along? So that's important. What's the scope?
Yeah, obviously we've described the target zone.
Yep.
You should be aware of what price you are willing to pay. Obviously, our other presentation will show you the zone of possible agreement, which should be based on your target zone for the prices and the vendor's target zones for the prices.
But the important thing is, don't go into a negotiation like this without having an idea of what's reasonable and what should be achievable. Our interest and their interest, well, we have a separate slide on that, so we'll get back to that. But that's basically about understanding what do you want to achieve and what do they want to achieve. What are the interests that you need to understand that they have? The BATNA is, what do you do if you don't agree? I mean, so what do you want to do if this vendor does not agree to get into your target zone? Do you put this out for a tender? Do you insource the activity? Do you live with the agreement for another 2 years before you shift to another vendor? I mean, what will you do in this case? And when do you walk away? That's the walk away criteria. And the options are all the things you can put into a negotiation like this. I mean, what could you do to sweeten the deal, so to speak, or to take out risk for the vendor? So that could be anything from, one good thing is to ask the vendor, what would make this a more profitable or deal for you, or what would we need to do for you to lower the price? The vendor could say we could change the SLA, we could change the governance setup, we could look into a combined pricing model with a fixed fee that would guarantee that we had a core team available for you and then a variable part. So basically looking into, we could look into a guaranteed revenue from our side and taking out some of the risk of the fully variable model. All these kind of things you could put into the deal. Those are listed under options. And before entering into the negotiation, make sure that you have your list of potential options that will both serve your interest, but also try and think in terms of what would be good looking at the vendor's interest. And just this is a good list to look at before you go into a negotiation. What are your interests? So where can you tick off on the left side? So what is most important for you? Is it minimizing the cost? Is it a faster resolution? Is it that you want experienced vendor resources with who are familiar with your application? Is it a quality issue? Is it increasing the operational maturity? Is it important for you that they actually demonstrate that you increase the operational maturity by getting fewer tickets over time? Is it of interest to you that you use offshore, or on the contrary, that they don't use offshore? And in all cases, transparency should be an interest for you. So look at the list and tick off those that are your interest in the particular negotiation, and then understand what drives the vendor. It's always important to understand the other side of the table when you negotiate. And for these kind of vendors, obviously profit is of interest. Guaranteed revenue is more important, is more valuable than potential revenue. So fixed price models are more attractive than variable priced models. That's just the way the world works. So, accommodating that is either a fixed price contract or a contract with a fixed price component. But you don't need to go there. You just need to understand that you are now going contra on on their interest. They need agreement where the pricing parameters actually have taken into account all the parameters that impacts the pricing. So they need for you to accept that high complexity, big size, low operational maturity, and those are things that actually will have an impact on the price. They have an interest in you paying for a fixed team of vendor resources. That makes production planning a lot more easy. They have an interest in full freedom to optimize as they move along. You might have the opposite. They have obviously an interest in establishing a login situation, whereas you have the opposite. And they have an interest in expanding into more business, for example, development projects. Now, for a particular vendor, some of these will be more important than others. You need to find out during the negotiation which are most important for the vendor. And a good way to find out is simply to ask. We're about the end here. Those of you who are able to read Danish, quarterly analytics, as usual, have resources to help you further. We have a playbook calling forlængelse, extension of maintenance agreements. And we also have a brand new article on sourcing of application maintenance. It's a big one, I think. So that has a lot more details on the stuff we've touched upon today. You're always welcome to contact either of us for follow-up questions, comments, or just have us come out and give a small presentation on your side. We are always eager to talk to clients about how to move forward on this issue. Then we'll just like to say thank you for your participation today, and hope to see you soon on a webcast here from Pilestræde.